Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for the final webinar of our PedsRes 2024 series. My name is Estelle Green. My pronouns are she, her. I am a fourth-year medical student at the Penn State College of Medicine in the University Park curriculum located in the Happy Valley of State College, Pennsylvania, and I am serving as one of the co-directors for FuturePedsRes this year.
Hello, everyone. My name is Catherine Geico. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm currently a fourth-year medical student at Virginia College of Osteopathic Medicine in Blacksburg, Virginia, and I'm serving as one of your other co-directors for FuturePedsRes this year. We'd also like to take the moment to introduce to the FPR webinar team that's working behind the scenes tonight, Associate Director of Webinars, Denise, and Assistant Director of Webinars, Divya.
If you are interested in learning more about physician scientist training programs or pediatric research tracks, tune into the American Physician Scientists Association webinar in 2 days at 7 p.m. EST. This webinar is open to all students who want to learn more about the different research options during pediatric residency, and will be an opportunity to hear about individual PSTPs and residency programs with research tracks. You can register by clicking the link in your chat.
We are also excited to share with you another webinar that we will be doing in collaboration with the AAP section on pediatric trainees that will be discussing ERAS application finances. It'll take place next Tuesday, the 19th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. The objective will be to provide you all with insight into how to manage your expenses, particularly related to this application cycle. We understand these concerns can compound the stress associated with the cycle, rotations, applying everything, and we hope to alleviate that a little bit with our discussions. To register, feel free to scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the chat.
Now, a lot of open houses are happening right now, and it can be kind of overwhelming to know when and where and how. So we wanted to share this awesome hub, the Concepts Hub, where you can find various programs, open houses, all in one convenient location. Feel free to scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in your chat to check it out. Before we continue, we would like to acknowledge our APPD faculty advisor, Dr. Michael Dell. Hello, Dr. Dell, Vice Chair of Education at Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine, as well as Colleen Hughes, who serves as the Associate Executive Director for APPD. And we'd also like to acknowledge our concept faculty advisor, Dr. Rachel Thompson. Hello again, Assistant Professor of Pediatrics and Director of Pediatric Undergraduate Medical Education at the Boston University Trowbridge and Abbott School of Medicine. These individuals have made tonight possible, and we're really grateful for their support. And now let's dive into our goals and agenda for tonight. Our objective for tonight's wrap-up session are to prepare pediatric applicants for virtual interviews by providing a strong understanding of residency interview format and questions, recommendations on interview etiquette, and the essential do's and don'ts of virtual interviews. From 8 to 9 p.m., we have a virtual residency interview presentation, and we'll be joined by a lovely panel of faculty to share advice and answer your much anticipated questions. We have prepared 5 questions for the panelists, but then we'll take questions from the audience. Afterwards, please stay. We'll have our amazing program faculty panel log off, but we'll have our resident panel joining us from 9 to 9:30 p.m. EST, who'll be there to share the experience and answer any remaining questions you may have. Though the first portion of the webinar will be posted on our YouTube channel, please note that the resident panel portion of the evening will not be recorded.
And now we will jump into discussing the crucial part of the match process, the interviews. Tonight we have with us our wonderful ComStat faculty advisor, Dr. Rachel Thompson, who will be speaking on virtual residency interviews. Please grab a pen, notepad. There'll be lots of useful tips.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me here today to talk with you all about residency interviews. This is something I talk with my own students about a lot, and I jokingly put up this New Yorker cover. I loved it when it came out back in the the time and date that's there. But minus that martini glass, we recognize a lot of these virtual interviews are hard to get yourself ready for at home, right? Because there's just a lot of madness at home in the background sometimes. And so I hope to share with you guys a couple of tips about how to make yourselves feel like you're in that professional environment and getting ready for the actual big day. So to start, I want to start by talking about some of the basics. A lot of this hopefully will be familiar to you all, but I just think it sort of bears just mention. So what can you do before the actual big day to kind of get yourself ready? I think that simply put, what you want to make sure of is that on the day when you log in, that you are the focus of that interview, that you allow that interviewer to remember you, that they're not thinking about any interference that happened during the day or during the interview once that interview starts. So I think I channel the energy of my AP history teacher from high school who said to me, proper prior planning prevents poor performance. So plan it out. And I say, really, like, try out that location, think about how it works so that you can sound your best, you can look your best, and you can really minimize those distractions. So what would potentially be a pitfall for sounding your best? A lot of you are going to have folks who you live with, your roommates, who may also be on Wi-Fi at the same time, potentially doing interviews. I think it is worth sort of checking in with them to see how many people are going to be using the Wi-Fi at the same time, because it could cause some lag in the transmission of your video. So if that is going to be the case, if you think that there may be a lot of you online and you can't get other people to sort of jump off the Wi-Fi while you're having your interview, and you already know that you have unstable Wi-Fi at home, I think you probably have two options. Again, none of this is genius here. One is you go old school and you get yourself an Ethernet cable and you plug in. It'll give you stable connection. You won't have things jumping around. The other is just to consider other options. Most schools, if you talk with your school, may have rooms that you can sort of reserve in advance, where you may have fewer interruptions and have a quiet space where you can do the interview. What about looking your best? Like, I'll save the hair and makeup discussion for the actual day of, but planning ahead, you can simply think about what is the background you want to have behind you that's not going to be distracting. It can be a simple clean space. It can be a wall. It doesn't have to be some sort of special background. And in fact, I'd kind of advise against using some kind of creative background. Again, this is the moment for you to shine and not for the distraction of the background to be telling a story other than what you're trying to portray during the actual conversation. If you don't have that kind of neutral background and you're worried at the potential for some sort of implicit bias based on your background, you can certainly use a blurred background. You can use a professional background that some of the schools provide for students. All of those are welcome and totally acceptable. Check your lighting. None of us want to look like we're in a witness protection program, sort of with the face all blackened out and the background lit up. So check that. You know, you're going to be interviewing different times of day, different places. Make sure it works. And then the last thing is the obvious. Hopefully I will not do an example here as I am talking to you from my home with a dog who is rather unpredictable. But you want to think about how to minimize actual interruptions and distractions during the interview. You know, is there construction in their area? Do you have a dog who barks? Curious kids who are going to walk through your room? Do you have a cat who likes to sit on your computer? All of those things happen. I've seen them all happen with my students when I teach them. But again, the idea is we're totally a very generous and understanding group of folks in pediatrics, but you just want this to be about you. So the next slide, again, one thing you may have all gotten comfortable with is whatever the platform is your school is using for doing remote teaching, but recognize that a lot of the different programs may use different platforms for video conferencing. If they send you a link that talks about what the technologies that they'll use, download that software in advance, try it on your computer, really make sure that you know where the key functions are, like how do you mute, how to get your video on, how do you make sure that you get the virtual background that you want. All of those things can be different on the different platforms, and you don't really want to be fussing with them on the day of, or realizing when you try and log in that morning that it requires that you download software. Also, just a side note, I'm not a technology expert, but I do know that many of these platforms have different technology needs in terms of their speed testing. You can use like the free speed testing available on most web browsers. There are apps you can download. What I do know is that it's the upload speed you want to check and just make sure that your upload speed is adequate for whatever platform is being used by the program. All right, boring stuff out of the way. Let's talk about the actual interview itself and how you can prepare and really do your best. Two things that I would say here. One is really get to know the program in advance. I'm sure you guys are all doing that as you're thinking about which programs you're actually applying to. Have those notes ready, the things that you were really interested in. One of the nice advantages of being on a platform like this is that you can have your notes up on the screen next to you, so you can think about the actual program and remind yourself on the day of what it was that made you apply there. And with that, keep in mind that you will probably have an opportunity to ask questions of your interviewer, and it's nice to be prepared with those questions. Three things to think about in advance when you're thinking about those questions. One is, do you have specific things that you read about that program that you're interested in learning more, so that you can just sort of understand, is that a real reality as a part of that program? The other is, it's always an opportunity when you ask a question to find a way to tell them more about you and something specific to you. So, do you have a global health interest? Here's a way to get that, and it hasn't yet been discussed during your interview. Here's a nice opportunity to say, hey, I was reading about your global health opportunities. This is something that really interests me. Here's what I've done in the past. Can you tell me more? Lastly, I would say this is really important if you're trying to compare across programs. I have had conversations with several students who are really interested in, for example, what does the program do in terms of something like diversity, equity, and inclusion? And if they're trying to compare across programs, if you have a couple of questions that are set that you ask of each program, you may be able to compare better at the end of the day. When all is said and done, you're actually going to end up with A, a lot of information, B, a lot of links and dates, and it can be a little overwhelming to stay organized. So starting now, I would plan a strategy so that when those interviews start rolling in, you have a calendar or something, some Excel spreadsheet that helps notify you of when you have an upcoming interview and what the link is for that session. There are going to be open houses, there are going to be interviews, there's going to be happy hours. All of those things are going to come up, and you're going to want to say, how do I keep track of all of this? There are like project management things. I think I have created a board using something called Trello. I have no like financial affiliation with them, but it's a great way to kind of stay organized. It links to your calendar. If you like Excel spreadsheets, whatever it is, but start something and try and use it throughout the time that you're interviewing, so that you can actually finish that interview day and type notes right into your spreadsheets that you remember when you're making your rank list in the spring or in the late winter. What did you like about the program, or what was it kind of didn't feel quite right? Try to avoid too many interviews in 1 week. I think the temptation is there to try and put them all back to back, not realizing that a full day on Zoom is really just as draining as an in-person interview. So even though you're not traveling, we usually recommend around 2 per week. So you're kind of being like keeping your head straight and still still feeling fresh when you show up. It's not possible for everybody. I think a lot of students who are couples matching, that's just not an option. So I know that that's the case for some. The last thing I want to highlight here is the joint letter to the pediatrics community that was released by sort of APPD, FuturePedsRes, Concept, Next Gen Peds, which went over guidelines and recommendations for residency programs and for applicants. And we'll pop that in the chat so you guys have the link to that. But the one thing I want to highlight now, I think there's a lot of information for applicants that's worth reading, is around the courtesy around canceling interviews. It's kind of like a pay it forward model. If you have a strategy that's set up about what dates you have different things and you realize you're overwhelmed, or you have too many, what a luxury, you can cancel and pay it forward so that another student can pick up that interview, or perhaps you'll be the beneficiary of somebody canceling. Next slide. What about the actual questions to think about? I recommend to my students that they anticipate and maybe rehearse some of the commonly asked questions. And what is it that you're hoping to convey? So how does your answer to maybe one of the common questions that's out there that you can search on the web help you sound like you're applying for the job of future resident? Does it highlight a skill? Does it highlight something about your personality, some other kind of added benefit that you're going to be bringing to that class to kind of round out that class, whether it's something specific to medicine or specific to the other kinds of things you do in your free time that really make that a whole class? I have a list here on the right. There's nothing special about some of the commonly asked questions, but I do want to highlight 2 different things there, the behavioral and standardized questions. Those may kind of come out of left field for some people. What's a behavioral question? Simply put, it's a question which asks you to think about a certain situation. What was the action that you took as a result of that? And then what was the result, or how did you learn or grow from that? So what does that require you to do in advance? It requires you to kind of think about specific anecdotes, specific examples that you can use if you get a behavioral question, or if you just want to have something that sits in the mind of your interviewer. Common behavioral questions might be something about, talk to me about a time when you had a conflict with someone who was on your team, and how did you handle it? Those kinds of questions. Is there something, tell me about a time when your performance was criticized or when you made an error, and what was the result of that? So you can describe that situation, as I say in that right-hand box, what was the action that you took, and then what was the result of that, and how did you grow? Standardized questions are a little bit vaguer. I apologize, I don't have like a list of those questions for you to think about. But this is when a program might have a standardized list of questions that they have their interviewer may have only one question. They may have only a very brief interview with you, and they ask that same question of every student who meets with them, and then they sort of grade that answer. You'll probably hear scuttlebutt on the interview trail from your friends about who's doing that. It does change from year to year. Some programs experiment with it. And then the last big piece here is, you know, we all do better when we get a little bit of feedback, but you like the feedback better if you know specifically what you're looking for. So talk to your friends and say, I'm trying out this. Does it sound too rehearsed? Does it sound authentically like me? And did I talk too much or too little? In which, what I mean by that is, did I create conversation? This whole discourse between you and the interview should feel like a nice, friendly conversation. If you fill the airtime the whole time, they may learn less about you than you'd like. All right, last slide, y'all. The big day has come. So what are you going to do on that day? Well, harkening back to what I said at the top, you want to make a good impression. So check your lighting again. Check out your background again. I kid you not, this was how I logged into the last interview that I did. I was fortunately the interviewer and not the interviewee. I completely forgot that the last thing I attended was my uncle's 85th birthday. And this was what we were asked to do, was to pull a memory and put it behind us for our background. Not ideal. Fortunately, the applicant was engaged with that background. I probably switched it. Dress professionally. That has a very wide definition, but I think what makes you feel like you're applying for a job? You're not going to be physically in that space. And I find that sometimes wearing the attire of the interviewer makes you really step up and into that interview space. And it'll make you feel more like you're there and less like you're in your living room. And the last thing here I'd say is be on time. And by that, I mean, be a little bit early, so that if there's any technology kind of troubles that you're running, you can troubleshoot them a little bit, and be prepared for the fact that there could be, even with all of this planning, some kind of interview fail. I mean, some kind of internet fail. So I do recommend, if your interviewer doesn't offer this, consider exchanging phone numbers, so that if something totally goes kaput, you can connect over cell phones. And the last thing I'll say before I leave this to our incredible panel is to just be yourself. How did you get here? You got there to that interview day because they went through hundreds, maybe thousands of applicants, and they chose you. That means they looked at your CV, they read your personal statement, they read those letters of recommendation, and now they're saying, this is someone I want to get to know better. And so use this as an opportunity for exactly that. Let them get to know you, take a deep breath and relax, and realize that this should be a friendly conversation. And I'll leave it there. I'm happy to take questions if folks have them directly for me, but I know that our panelists are going to be just amazing and able to take pretty much anything you throw their way. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Thompson, for this wonderful presentation. I've definitely learned a lot. And though nervous, I am really excited to apply all these great tips in the upcoming months, twice a week maximum. So it is now time to meet our wonderful pediatric residency program panelists for tonight's event. So we have Dr. Dennis Spencer, who is the Associate Program Director for the Boston Combined Residency Program. We have Dr. Nilinda Transangavesh, who is the Program Director at the University of Texas at Austin Dell Medical School. Dr. Aaron Shedlock, the Program Director at Penn State Health Milton Hershey Medical Center. Dr. Catherine Michelson, the Program Director at the Ann and Robert H. Lurie Children's Hospital of Chicago, and Dr. Angelique Regis-McCoy, the Assistant Program Director at Rainbow Babies and Children's Hospital.
Thank you all so much for taking the time to be with us tonight. And without further ado, let's get started. We're going to jump into the Q&A section of the webinar. Panelists, we encourage you to provide insights following the answer from the designated individual. So there will be one person answering each question. However, we highly encourage you to be engaged afterwards if you would like to add anything. Additionally, we really encourage you to engage in the Zoom chat as well if you feel called to do that. Our first question is for Dr. Spencer. How can we appropriately show interest and enthusiasm in a program during interviews and throughout the overall process?
Okay, and again, just so thankful to be here. So excited to talk to you all who are in attendance about this very daunting process it feels from your perspective. So we acknowledge that. We want to normalize that, but you too will do awesome, okay, as long as you prepare. And this question I have here is one that I think it comes down to some of the points that Dr. Thompson already mentioned. She talked about, making sure you've done your homework, making sure you've taken some notes. What demonstrates to me that you are interested and enthusiastic about my program is not you saying the words, I'm interested in your program, but rather you showing it to me. So if you're interested in my program, how are you interested in my program? Probably because you've hopefully read about my program or you have some type of experience. Maybe you've engaged with us at one of our recruitment efforts at a conference, or you have an investigator that made you want to learn more about where they're from, and then you learn more about our program. These are things that demonstrate to me, without you telling me, that you are interested. It's also helpful, as Dr. Thompson mentioned, for certain things, to just practice saying it out loud, to yourself, to friends. If, for instance, you know that you have a lot of things that you like about my program, which I want to believe there's a lot of things you like about our program, you may be concerned about going on or rambling. So you may want to practice, okay, what are the 3 or 4 points that I want to make mention of about why I want to come to Boston Combined Residency Program. And if you say it out loud to a couple people and they can give you some feedback, or even just you articulating it out loud, you realize, oh, that sounds more awkward than I thought, that can also be helpful, just to have that experience. But if I can impart one thing, it would be you show interest and enthusiasm by showing that you've put the effort in to do your homework. And I would also point back to you, how do you know that you have interest and actual enthusiasm if you haven't done homework? So it feels disingenuous if you express how much you love my program, but you know nothing about it, and it's very clear from our interaction. And also having some questions to me or your interviewer that also demonstrate that you have familiarity. So ask a question that speaks to this thing that you might have seen on our website about a future program we're bringing on board, or like a new track that we've added to our residency, because that demonstrates that you have interest, you've done your homework, but also gives a talking point for us to have a conversation. So I would love to hear if there's any other panelists who have some thoughts about that.
Hi, everyone. I would just really co-sign all of that. I'm Angelique Reedus-McCoy. I'm one of the assistant program directors at Rainbow. And I agree. I think I love to be able to hear from applicants, what they found intriguing about our program, what they feel like aligns with their interests, and how they can continue to grow in that area. And so if they see something in our program that allows them to maybe reach one of their aspirations or explore an aspiration that's growing in them, to be able to ask questions about that and having done a little bit of research ahead of time, I think speaks volumes. So definitely I'm co-signing doing your research.
Sometimes that can extend to knowing the city, the region, the patient population, the communities that are served. That shows the same sort of effort to get to know what a hospital and program and their clinical services are all about. I'm Kim Michelson. I'm really excited to be here.
And good evening, everyone. I'm Aaron Shedlock. Yeah, that was, I think, a great answer from Dr. Spencer, because I think that a lot of you as applicants probably were thinking the obvious, like, I want to signal the program, I want to send them an email, I want to, write one of those love letters, which, by the way, in that letter that Dr. Thompson referenced, the APPD letter, they talk a little bit about that post-interview communication, but none of that really shows that you have a strong interest in the program. specifically why, as Dr. Spencer said. So I really like that answer. And the only other like aspect that I would say that you could sort of research to really show a lot of interest in your program as well is if you get your interviewers in advance, learn a little bit about who they are, what they do, what type of medicine that they do, and potentially what kind of research they may do, because again, that just really shows that you want this and you really want to have a really genuine conversation, and a really valuable conversation too. So sometimes programs will give you your interviewers in advance, and it's a great opportunity to keep your conversation going whenever you sort of know a little bit about their backgrounds.
And actually, I realized I did not fully answer the question throughout the overall process. So just to very briefly point that it is fair game to reach back out, after the interview. I think that part of what I'm getting from this question is the assumption that some people maybe throughout the process, it falls off the rails because they've done something wrong in the vein of thinking they're just demonstrating continued interest. So I would say that, it's fine to reach out, especially if there's a new question that you have or something that, again, demonstrates this alignment with you and them that you just want to share. But I would be very careful about, coming across overly eager. And what does that mean? It means if you've now sent the 6th email that you have sent to your interviewer, you may want to sit back and wonder, did it need 6? And maybe it did, but you do want to also recognize that there are those who will go maybe a little overboard, but it's okay. Don't feel like there's a problem if you want to reach out and communicate. The opposite is not necessarily true. There's a lot more rules about us reaching out to you, but you can reach out to us just within reason. Don't go overboard, but it's all fair game if you do it for a reason. If you're doing it just to say, oh, I'm still so interested, that may not have needed to be in an email.
Thank you so much for these incredible insights. Our second question will be for Dr. Sransagavej. If you signal a program in ERAS and do not get an interview, should you follow up with a letter of interest?
I am Melinda Tarnsangave. I'm in Austin right now. Thank you for having me, and I'm excited to get the chance to hopefully help calm some of the fears that you guys are having. You are entering the field of pediatrics, which is the best field. We are biased, but there's a lot to look forward to. So this should be a fun and exciting process for you. So that being said, if you signal a program in ERAS and you do not get an interview, should you follow up with a letter of interest? I certainly think that is okay. I would say similar to probably what Dr. Spencer had mentioned, a follow-up or an email expressing your interest, I think would be acceptable. I probably would not send 5 or 6 communications, knowing that during the interview season, the people who are, whoever you're emailing might be addressing a lot of different emails at once. So that would be one thing. I probably would not send multiple emails, but I do think it's okay if you want to communicate that interest or bump things up. As guidance in general, so as background, the program signals are relatively new for pediatrics programs, and often programs are still sort of negotiating or navigating what to do with them. I would say it is more challenging with the geographic signals rather than the specific program signals, but the guidance that is out there is that programs should review applications of individuals who signal them, as well as a signal does not necessarily mean an automatic interview, but it is a suggestion to review an application. And the guidance that we're supposed to use, or at least that we try to give amongst each other, is that a program signal should be used in making a decision or distinguishing between candidates that might be, in essence, equal. All things being equal, if somebody signaled your program and you were, say, breaking a tie, then that would be how it would be used. I again think it seems reasonable to reach out. I would just use caution and sort of bombarding and knowing that, again, this time of year it's pretty busy with emails. I think that is it, unless there are probably other thoughts from this group as well.
Signaling is tough to know what to do with. Only thing I would add is it can be certainly nerve-wracking waiting on that interview, especially a place that you really want to go to. If there is a program that you love and you really hope they can make that second look at your application, I think it's fine to do the email. I totally agree. I do also think talking to your letter writers, your mentors, because I mean, that can also be helpful. You know, we talk to our colleagues all the time. And if one of them say, well, my mentee, who's amazing, has applied, you know, I'm just curious, do they still have a shot? You know, that might also help me to, you know, think, okay, what was it about the application? Because again, you have this network of mentors and you can use them. Again, I should not get 5 emails from your mentor either, but you can use them as well as a resource.
I would just add, I think with those letters, kind of along the lines of what others have said before, is really, be specific about what it is that has sparked your interest in the program. Don't just kind of make a generic, I would really love to come to your program. There should be a clear reason. And typically that reason is going to go along with something that you mentioned in your interview, something that's in your application that shows that, again, like you feel like you would be a good fit for that program. So I would be as specific as possible and genuine as possible as to what it is that has really sparked your interest in that particular program.
I think, you know, you guys are all in your mid to late 20s and 30s, and sometimes programs are of interest because of all of the wonderful attributes about that program and its alignment with your goals. Sometimes, you know, you need to be in a certain geographic area because of loved ones. A partner just got into business school, and so you are headed in that direction, and hoping that your two paths are going to meet there. And so it is, you know, not uncommon, I think, also to get a letter that says something new, actually, that we didn't realize in the application that underlines why you're really interested in a program. Maybe it's about the program and what the program offers. Sometimes it's, I have a really special interest in this city because of this personal attribute or characteristic or you know, situation. And you know, to the point made before, I think this is true across industries. We're a bunch of pediatricians who want to understand those things to the extent possible to help and factor that in. And so you know, you shouldn't do that to 10 programs, but it may be that there are 1 or 2 that are really elevated that you really want an interview because of that alignment professionally or personally. And I have definitely seen people communicate about that. And there are a lot of emails coming in, but seeing that, you know, makes me register. We need to make sure we're looking at this application. There's a big draw for that person to our city, personal need that they need to be here. It's important to understand and try to capture that in our assessment.
One of the great things about pediatrics, especially that you're applying into, is that our leadership, the APPD, has really pushed, and I think most of our programs have endorsed this whole concept of a holistic review. For instance, that letter basically is recommending to all of our programs not to send a single invite out at least 2 weeks after ERIS dates go live on the 27th of September. But many of our programs will take longer to even send invites out even after that minimum 2-week period. And that's because it obviously does take a lot of time to conduct those holistic reviews. So I think just sort of be patient. I think those 2 to 4 weeks are going to be some of the longest days of your lives because you're just going to be excited. You've applied, but like, where are the emails? And I tell all of my advisees at Penn State Medical School, like College of Medicine, like, you know, don't panic. Like, I think our specialty has really endorsed this holistic review. I'm very proud of our specialty for doing that. I think it's really important, but it takes a long time. And so Don't get trigger happy with the emails would be my suggestion, because every email that we all get bogged down takes away some of our time to read these applications that we're trying to provide that holistic review in. So, just be mindful of that in this whole process. And other than that, I sort of agree with all of my colleagues. And sometimes these emails that come through later expressing interest, if there is an update to your application that it's been a month or so, and maybe you got a publication that just wasn't available in September when you were able to release, that can be useful too, because it sort of gives you a reason to update that program that you're really interested in. And it also provides an actual update to your application, which can be really helpful for all of us.
Thank you all. We will move on to our third question. This will be directed at Dr. Shedlock. Is there an advantage to choosing an early interview date? For example, October versus December?
Yeah, thank you for the question, and thank you everyone for having me. I'm just going to give you a quick disclaimer. My wife is at back to school night, and I've got 3 kids, I think watching TV right now, and a 2-year-old puppy around here. So if I do get that interruption that Dr. Thompson mentioned, please don't judge me for that. But I'm really excited to be here with you all. I know you're getting really excited, and we are too. This is a great question. And when I first got this in advance, I do this in my own program. I actually analyze this data, and my first answer was no, it really doesn't. I've been looking at our data, and we seem to match pretty equally across all of the months. But I guess any sort of academic pediatrician, I went into the literature because I figured that someone actually probably have asked these questions before. I found about 4 or 5 studies that looked into this, although interestingly, I couldn't find many in pediatrics, but I've found things in anesthesia and emergency medicine and internal medicine. And they all pretty much say the same thing, that the interview date and the interview time, that was also looked at recently, the time of the day, really didn't matter. The only thing I could find that had very tight statistical significance in the literature was one internal medicine program's experience with the middle portion of the interview season being tiny bit statistically significantly higher chances of matching than at the beginning. But let's just talk about why this is a common misconception and why people think about this, right? So I think most of these studies, or most people kind of think of the interview season maybe in tertiles, early, which is probably kind of in October, early November timeframe, middle season, which is probably mid to late November to mid to late December, and then late being late December to some programs interview in January. So if you think of it in tertiles, I think there's some common reasons why people think that this could be an issue. So if you look at that very early time period in October, I think the pros of interviewing at this time are, as an applicant, you're fresh, right? You're ready to go. You're super excited. You haven't been zoomed out yet. So you're ready to, hit these interviews flying, and you have all that energy needed to research the programs in advance that, and be really prepared. And on the flip side, the programs themselves are fresh too, right? They haven't done, 10, 15 interview days yet. And the residents, which are so key to this process, they haven't been to multiple virtual interviews yet either. Their happy hours or however different programs structure this. And so there's a pro to doing it early. Everyone's got the energy and are very excited about interview season. The cons that I think a lot of people sort of think about in that very early interview timeframe is that, yeah, everyone's got a lot of energy, but everyone might be a little rusty, right? If it's your first interview day as an applicant and maybe you've never interviewed on Zoom or a particular virtual platform before, you could worry about IT hiccups or just how I'm going to come across on virtual interview day. But don't worry, applicants, because we think about that too, and we worry about that too as programs. It's our first day too sometimes, and so we all have the opportunity to kind of get some kinks out, I think. But that's obviously a real thing, and people make adjustments as they go. So perhaps that first interview day could be a little bit tricky. So how to overcome some of those cons in that very early interview period that I would recommend, take advantage of mock interview opportunities. So many national organizations, but also just individual medical school institutions offer these opportunities. So take advantage to practice, record yourself, watch your recording, and just sort of see how you're coming across and the lighting and everything that's involved with a virtual interview day. I'd also potentially recommend, I don't know if this is applying across the board, but I think it's a great idea to interview at your home institution first, if that's possible. They sort of know you. and they know what they're sort of getting already if you've already done a lot of rotations with them. And perhaps, at least at Penn State, like I know all of my Penn State students that are sort of applying. And so I've kind of met with them already in some aspects from an advising standpoint. So it may be considered a safe interview, but there may be some caveats to that. And, if you have sort of like in your mind, like a pre-interview kind of rank list or whatever in your head and be like, okay, like I applied to this place, but like they're number 15 out of 15 that ever want to go, you could consider like trying to interview places that you think you may be a little less interested at first if you want to sort of overcome some of that rustiness that you might be worried about. Let's flip it to sort of like the late side. So like, why do people like or not like the late side of the interviews, like in January or something like that? So obviously the pros, or sort of the opposite of it, of the first one, right? Like people are in their groove. They've done this before. They've got their process down, both applicants and programs. But the cons, I think, is that it is true that like Zoom fatigue or virtual interview fatigue is definitely real. It was real when I did it in person, the old days. You were tired from all the traveling, but I think that it's actually even more real in the virtual environment. Like I think people just get really tired, things really blend together. And so obviously, like if you're exhausted, you may not interview as well. If the residents themselves are exhausted because it's another triple-demic and they're working really hard and the hospitals are busy, then they just may not also be able to put on the best front for the program. And so that could be the cons of those late interview season interviews. How to overcome that, I guess, from your perspective as an applicant, in terms of just letting, things blending together, I think you're all very organized. I think we all tend to be A-type in this field. So like just keeping that really organized spreadsheet to kind of keep all of your thoughts together and put them down after you interview a place is something I definitely recommend. So you can try to keep all those distinguishing features together. And then just kind of really just keep reviewing those program websites and coming up with unique questions based on that to be prepared. And I might even recommend towards the end when Zoom fatigue really sticks in, really think about like allowing more time off between interviews, maybe only doing 1 a week instead of 2, just to kind of stay fresh and not be burnt out. And then the middle, I'm not going to talk about, but obviously that, is sort of the peak of the bell curve and perhaps like the best of both worlds. And maybe that's what that internal medicine program found. But that is sort of what my recommendations are. I think at the end of the day, I don't think it really matters as long as you follow all the tips that have already been presented and that you come to the interview date really prepared. But I'm interested in what some of my other colleagues might have to say about this.
I think be happy that you have interviews and don't think too hard about it. The timing is going to be as it is because other people will also fret realizing that, oh goodness, I'm on this rotation and I really can't get out. So like my earliest time to interview is going to be this later date. Am I screwing myself? Some things are not in your control. Take the interview date, kill it when you get here. Try not to. You will overthink yourself into a tizzy. And that's what we don't want. We want you to be clear-headed and your amazing selves when we meet you so we can actually see the real you.
Agree. Don't overthink it, but I do think it is reasonable to consider interviewing early at your home institution, again, because you are likely comfortable with and know a lot of the people who are going to take part in the interview day as well. And so it is also probably easier to go through the preparation to understand and know a little bit more about the program because you already have a little bit of inside knowledge. I think similarly, that could be the case for if you've rotated at a program as well. Taking one of the earlier slots might also be comfortable, beneficial, or you have that experience fresh in your mind as well.
Thank you so much. And so our fourth question will be for Dr. Michelson. What are some illegal questions we should not be asked about on the interview day? How can we answer without answering in a professional way and report them as a violation in a way that protects us as applicants?
I'm so thankful for being here. Thanks for the invitation. And I'm, again, Kate Michelson. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the PD at Lurie Children's. And I think this is a really important question that may be on your minds, not yet on your minds, and that there is a good amount of information about on the NRMP, on listservs, both directed at like students and what to do and how to prepare, but also for residency programs about how to train interviewers, how to provide preparation and guardrails for them so that they know these rules and hopefully are carrying that into the interview. There are a couple of sort of types of illegal questions. Some of them are based on federal laws, others are NRMP laws, and they both matter. And so, you know, from a federal law standpoint, when you were interviewing for employment, you should not be asked about any type of protected status. So you should not be asked about, in a direct way, race, ethnicity, country of origin, gender identity, sexual orientation, pregnancy status, disability. All of those are off limits. I can talk in a minute about how to approach if you were to get a question like that or a flavor of a question like that that made you uncomfortable, but those all shouldn't be a part of interviewing or hiring. The second type is the NRMP laws. So there's a code of conduct that NRMP asks every program director to attest having read, and that they view programs having responsibility over all of their interviews for behaving this way, that specifically is around like privacy and confidentiality. So there are specific language, you know, that I instruct faculty. You can't ask someone, you can certainly say, why are you interested in our program, to get to the very first question and all of the thoughtful answers that came from the panelists about that. But you can't ask, what other programs are you interested in? You're really not supposed to ask, what other regions are you applying to? Where have you interviewed already? All of those are off limits. And then in a technical way later in the season, and Dennis was referring to this, you know, you are allowed to reach out to the program. Some programs may reach out to you. That gets gray. What is never supposed to happen is that there is supposed to be any transactional communication. If you do this, we'll rank you this way. If you follow, you know, this step or tell us this thing, we will do this. It can be unidirectional communication from a program to you and nothing else. And that is really important based on how the match works, how ranking works, to make you guys feel comfortable in taking the time and reflection and opportunities to make decisions that are the right things for you. And that's how you should build your rank list, is what program do I want to go to first? That's your number one, and then down from that. And there shouldn't be any strategy or games that you do different than that. It should reflect what's your number one, which I know is in part common sense, but I also think is an important thing to come back to in January and February and remind yourself again, like that's the only thing that should guide this. If in an interview you get a question that feels like it is uncomfortable and is entering into these spaces where they are not supposed to be asking in a direct way, I think there's a couple of ways to respond. You can respond, you know, briefly and vaguely, in a way that allows you to say something if that's sort of where your momentum takes you, but then wraps it up and moves on. I think it's very reasonable to also say, I am not able to answer that. I'm not sure of the relevance of it. I feel uncomfortable asking that. I would love to answer the next question. And there's probably versions in between. And this may be one of the things, just because it will feel high stakes if it comes up, to practice out loud, just so the muscle memory of having said it once or twice feels comfortable to you to reach to. You know, there are versions of the privacy and confidentiality ones that I do think sometimes people are trying to understand, like, what's important to you? Are there people or parts of the country that matter in terms of your network of supports? And, you know, getting back to Rachel's question, you could decide to lean into that in a way that is advantageous to you, comfortable to you, builds on your goals, or you couldn't. And I think it's very comfortable to avoid that, or just ask to go to the next question. And then as a PD, you know, if there was ever an interviewer that I was not doing this correctly in interviews, I would 100% want to know, so that that wasn't continuing through the interview season. But it's a big potentially deal to say, like, how am I going to do that as an individual? So you could talk to your medical advisor, you know, medical school advisor or your dean, and have them reach out. You could decide that you want to not have them reach out until after your match list is in. But I think as a program leader, you know, I personally would, you know, only appreciate and respect being given that feedback, because it's an important set of guidelines that we need to be as an interview group within. And so knowing if we were off from that would matter to getting it right the next day or the next week. Open it up to all my panelists to add to that as well.
So I agree. I think that if somebody asked you a question, and this has happened to one of my trainees who was interviewing for fellowship, she straight up had a question asking about her plans to be pregnant, or if she was pregnant currently. And she came and told me, and I did provide feedback to the program, but I did wait until after rank lists were in because of the sensitivity of that. I do think, should you have questions that make you feel uncomfortable, please find, and again, it was an interviewer who was not the program director. So we as program directors don't have a lot of control over what people say, nor do we, I mean, and we want to be able to provide that feedback, but that is, because of the timing, I think also really challenging, because who knows, this person probably could have continued to interview people and maybe ask similar questions. But I would want to know as a program director as well.
As a 15-second add-on there, Dr. Dell has in the chat how many of our programs are trying to provide development around this. And actually tomorrow at 7 a.m., I'm giving a talk through GME to interviewers talking about mitigating bias during the virtual interview, because it's a thing that is emerging. Many interviewers haven't thought about this before, and they may have been doing some of these microaggressions the entire time. Provide that feedback, super important. The other thing that Dr. Michelson mentioned, I just want to also double down on, is that if there is an area that's among what we consider the illegal questions that you want to lean into, absolutely do that. If you have talked about your disability in your personal statement, and it's a major part of your identity formation and maybe even the scholarship you want to do in an academic career, lean into that. You know, because some interviewers might be nervous to bring it up, even though you said it in your personal statement, but you certainly can. So there's nothing illegal from your perspective to what you can say. But again, your interviewers should be careful to avoid certain topics that Dr. Michelson just said.
We're going to move on to our last prepared question. We are getting kind of close to time, so after this last question, we will open it up to questions from the audience. However, people are being great at responding in the chat. So if you have a question, please go ahead and just drop that in there. Our last question will be for Dr. Ritas McCoy. What is the biggest piece of advice you would give an applicant for interview day?
So I get kind of the easy question, right? Because I think we've had this amazing panel who has filled you all up, hopefully, and demystified this experience and whatever it was you were searching for as an applicant to learn about and to kind of help you feel more comfortable with the interview process. I think in pieces and parts, you've gotten that. So I will cheat a little bit, though. I will say, after you've checked your tech, because we want to make sure that's good, right? Like Dr. Thompson said. And after you've done your mock interviews, again, because we want to make sure you practice, the actual day, I think it is really about being yourself. And I think that actually was also on one of Dr. Thompson's slides. But that was like, when I read the question, that was the first thing that came to mind. I really want you all to be able to be your full and authentic selves, be professional, of course, but that, should all be encompassed in that. You are professionals, you're, future pediatricians. And so be yourself. And the flip side of that is really, look at this as an opportunity, not again, just for you to be interviewed, but for you to interview the program, for you to be your full self. You want to be able to go somewhere where you feel like that can shine through, that you can be your full authentic self in that program, thrive in the way you hope to thrive, celebrate the things about yourself, explore the community, explore your academic interests and so forth in that space. So it's kind of a volley of, bringing yourself, your full and best self to the interview, but also really thinking about what is going to continue to nurture that, what program is going to be that. And the reality is, many of us go into this process thinking about, what's going to be our prelim number one programs, the programs that we signal. And sometimes we get surprised. Sometimes it's, sometimes it is, the most prestigious program in the country. Sometimes it is a program that you weren't really thinking as much about, but you're like, oh my goodness, the residents have created this amazing culture. This is a place where I can thrive. This is a place where I can be happy. And so I really think really centering yourself, centering your needs, shining, not being modest, but really also thinking about where can all that goodness in me thrive somewhere, where will I be my best self. And so I think that part is huge. Residency is, as we all can attest, is a challenging space, even in pediatrics, right? We're happy and we're, the Hufflepuffs of the world. But at the end of the day, it's still challenging, right? You're working incredibly hard and you want to spend those next 3 years and potentially, time in fellowship and potentially even your career as a faculty member, somewhere that you'll be happy. And so be honest with yourself, be true to yourself, and ultimately just be yourself, and have fun. I hope that once the angst of, waiting for interviews happens, that you really get to go in and just live it up and meet all these amazing people across the virtual interview path, and really get a chance to explore pediatrics and the amazing programs that are available, because there are many. If anyone else has any other comments to that.
I love that. And I can maybe tie it into a comment I just saw fly too. The first ones will all be nervous. We'll be just as nervous as you, and lean into, especially later on when maybe you get Zoom fatigue, this is an opportunity to talk about your dreams in the profession and to talk with a bunch, the world gets smaller and smaller. And so this is an opportunity to go to pediatric hospitals and pediatric residencies and talk to people who are doing, work that you're interested in, get them to react to your goals, to talk about, things that you share passions around. And sometimes you'll just shoot the shit with people because you're really enjoying time together and you've connected on something. And I think starting the day by saying, I'm going to enjoy this day, I'm going to make it useful for me, I'm going to be myself, and I'm going to enjoy being myself with other either soon to be pediatricians or pediatricians, and get advice and talk about my future. And that will frame each day as an exciting mini adventure. And I think it's okay when the questions just are less about the program and more about other parts of profession and life, if it's useful to you.
Thank you so much for answering all of these questions so thoroughly. We really appreciate it. I was going to say we're going to open up the floor to live Q&A, but it's happening already. All these questions are really great, everyone. Now, if you prefer to remain anonymous, please feel free to send a message to Catherine or me, or also feel free to unmute and pass it to the crowd here.
We can start with one of our predetermined questions that you guys filled out on your surveys. How can you address barriers you've overcome in your interview? For example, taking time off in med school, those kinds of barriers.
I guess I'll start. I'll say that I think one of the things, so my other half of my job is I'm one of the assistant deans of student affairs at Case Western. And so we get this, right? Sometimes students have had academic challenges. Sometimes students have had personal issues that have, kind of shifted, provided an obstacle in their path. And one of my dear colleagues always says, make a message out of your mess. What was it how did you grow from this experience? Something happened and maybe wasn't what you had hoped for. It was unexpected. It threw you for a loop. But then how did you grow? Because the reality is we will all experience something that's going to throw us off, whether it's personally or professionally. And what's most important is that we find a way to regroup and grow from that. And ultimately, we become amazing teachers in that way too, because we can speak from experience when others are going through those things as well. So it helps us be a mentor for others down the line. So I think really, those barriers that, were in your path, being honest, but really focusing on the growth aspect of it, because that's really what we want to see. We want to be able to see that you were able to use that challenge as an opportunity for growth. And again, something that's made you stronger, made you more resilient, but then also going to be something that you can impart to others down the line.
There was the anonymous question about pre-match. I'm just trying to scroll back up. Let me make sure I'm understanding it. Pre-match offers. And another PD or panelist can totally jump in here. So in a very technical role-based way, the residency match is supposed to be an all-in process such that if a program is filling some of its spots in the match, it should be filling all of its spots in the match. That's different than fellowship and the rules that apply to fellowship. If a program is not in the match, then that's the all in, all out. And so if that was happening, there may be unique circumstances around it, or maybe something to talk about with your dean or advisor, just to make sure you're not entering a space where you shouldn't be asked to be before proceeding. So wanted to call that out because that I don't think should be happening unless I'm missing a specific circumstance where it is.
It is 9:02, so we do want to be respectful of everyone's time. We'll take maybe a few more questions, but please, our faculty panel, if you need to go, please feel free to hop off. In the meantime, as you're responding questions in the chats, we had another one which I thought was quite sweet and valid. What it was, when answering questions during the interview, should we stare at the camera to give the illusion of maintaining eye contact? Or is it okay to look at the interviewer on the screen?
Once again, I think that's where we're overthinking. And I say that because if you hear two different opinions, you may think, oh, now what do I do? So I think what's important is it's tough when you are talking to someone virtually or in person, and they are clearly looking away, like looking down. That's something to avoid. But it is hard. Do you look at the lens? Do you look at the screen? Like, I mean, that's a lot. So like if you're looking in the general direction, you seem engaged because you're not just looking everywhere which way. I think that is what you want. But should I be looking directly in the lens and not looking at my monitor? That's a lot.
I would say it's one of the nice things is an opportunity to keep your notes up on the screen. A lot of us do things electronically. And so sometimes looking down, you may just honestly be looking at your notes, but you can, as I said, you can have them up on your screen and you're still looking at the screen. So you're not looking down. I don't want you guys to be, again, it's like, I agree with you, Dennis, like you don't want to overthink it, but you also don't want to make yourself nervous and that starts to come across on the screen. So be natural, have your notes up there, and just let yourself, to use the words of somebody in the question, let yourself be a little free flowing.
I think all of these tips about how you set up your background, making sure your internet is stable, like all of these things are really just to help you feel comfortable in the day, right? Like we are all going to be accepting of, stuff happens. A storm might blow through and knock out your internet, and like all of these things can and will happen. Dogs, all of that. I think the goal is to try to control what you can so that you go into everything feeling as comfortable and as confident as possible. But like on the other end, our end, like we are generally, I would say, very understanding of all the things, right? Like we've all done something or had a child come in or had a dog running around the background. I think the goal is just to do everything in your power to make you feel comfortable and confident going into your interviews.
Yeah, I think if you just roll with the punches, that'll, be very realistic to what we've all been dealing with the last 3 years. So don't panic. Don't get all flustered. As long as you can kind of feel comfortable with that unexpected interruption, like no one's going to care. It's going to seem a lot more magnified on your end that you're going to be worried about than any of us as interviewers. So and that kind of goes with a lot of these questions too. And Dr. Spencer keeps saying, don't overthink it. It's definitely true. Like earbuds, where you're looking at, things like that. Just be who you are, show us who you are as an applicant. I do want to address, I saw a couple of things about couples matches in there, and I don't know how many people were able to respond in the chat yet, but people are sort of like, what is the fair game about sort of if I'm couples matching and my couples partner doesn't have like an interview yet, is it fair game to kind of talk about that? I think it is. I think you just have to kind of be mindful of when you do it. I would say it's not generally a great idea to talk about your couples match partner not having an interview before you even interview at the program. And that's happened with me before. I've gotten emails from applicants say, I have an interview with you next week, but my partner doesn't have an interview yet. And I personally was a little turned off by that because I'm like, you didn't even see our program yet. Like, I just feel like you're not going to interview at my program if your partner doesn't get one. So that doesn't feel good. But if you interviewed at a program and you really felt like you connected with some of the interviewers and the PDs and the residents and felt like this is a place you really feel like would be great, I don't think it's out of the question for you towards the end of an interview when the interviewer is like, do you have any more questions? Or is there anything I can do to help you understand more about our program, to maybe throw that in at the end? Or maybe even more perfectly, you don't have to send thank you emails or cards to any program. I would not really recommend cards, honestly, but you could send an email at the end and say like, thank you so much for the interview. I really enjoyed, there's so many things about your program that I loved. And I just want to let you know that I am couples matching and my partner still hasn't heard. We think that we'd be a great fit, at your institution or in the city. And that's a great opportunity to just sort of like put a punctuation mark on your interview day, especially if you've got great vibes that you think were sort of reciprocated during the interview day as well.